Diagnosing ADHD is one of the controversies in psychiatry, and there are very well-read and well-researched people who have the identity to, and then there are others, and it's part of a debate. It's part of a push-pull debate, and as a profession, interacting with society, we need to sort of move forward and come up with our best answers. There's definitely been times when pendulums have swung too far and too far. The other one is childhood bipolar disorder, which is being revamped for DSM-5, which is coming out in 2013. In the early 90s, we had a little bit of a blip on that sort of repressed memory stuff, and that has sort of swung back. So my point is not psychiatry is perfect, and the process of diagnosis and understanding conditions is flawed. It's probably the best we have. Does it need more work? Are we sort of on the move? I hope so. Yeah. Chemical imbalance, the monoamine theory, essentially your brain is made up of 100 billion neurons, and they all have to communicate with one another. And that slide I showed of the synapse, which is where the chemical messengers go across the neurotransmitters from one cell to the other. We all sort of understand that. Chemical imbalance theory is like if you have too much of something or not enough something in that synapse, then that gives rise to the problem. That sort of morphed into what those neurotransmitters actually do to the receptors on the far cell. So it's not so much the amount of stuff in the synapse, it's how that stuff is affecting the postsynaptic receptor. And that has a lot to do with them making changes in the postsynaptic cell and downstream in terms of turning certain genes on and certain genes off, giving rise to other substances that can sort of actually literally physically sculpt the central nervous system, revealing a lot more with sort of tracts in the brain and how one part of the brain communicates with the other. We're also talking about how our experiences actually get coded into our central nervous system. And the question about PTSD is a really good one, because in PTSD we've seen that we are subject to trauma, severe trauma, especially over time, especially when we're young. Parts of our brain actually do not physically develop in the appropriate way, and so we measure like hippocampal volumes and things like that. So it's a lot more complex than that. It was sort of used a little bit in 1908 and a little bit in the 20s. So the word was around, and it simply meant then a lasting memory trace. Hubbard will talk to you till he's blue in the face that an engram is not a memory. The neat thing about engrams, and this is not published a lot, but there is a psychiatric textbook published in 1947 called The Engrams of Psychiatry, and it was spelled E-N-G-R-A-M-M-E-S, and it was actually probably one of the first biological psychiatry textbooks ever published. And Hubbard would likely have seen it, and there's certainly some parallels between how this textbook discusses the engram concept and what Hubbard took from it. And that's one of the origins of things that you will not see in press very much. After that, after 1947, it's been Hubbard's all the way. No one uses it. I've actually struggled with that. There's an individual in this room who has actually met and worked with L. Ron Hubbard.
Who's speaking later today.
My own personal thought is that he started off by thinking that this was a load of crap and he was going to make a buck. But I think his narcissistic personality disorder was so profound and severe that he ended up sort of believing a lot of it. Not because he was psychotic. I do not think he was psychotic. I do not think he was hallucinating or fully delusional. I think it was almost almost like, well, because I'm saying it, therefore it's a good thing to believe and talk about. So he was on the cusp, but I do not think he was crazy. Your question is going to demand getting into the entire mind-brain conundrum, which I think you skeptics are kind of interested in. I don't have time to do that, but I mean, there's what is brain, what is mind, what is body, what is, at some point, is there anything that we experience that goes on that does not conform to the laws and the rules of basic physics, i.e. a spirit or an immortal soul or an essence that is beyond the laws of physics, which is beyond the central nervous system or not? I don't know the answer to any of those questions.
But is it necessary to know that answer in order to have some, I mean, there are some things you deal with as a psychiatrist and some things you don't deal with. So you make the distinction based on something, I guess.
I think if there's an issue that's coming out at you as though it's an issue of faith or religion or meaning, a psychiatrist, in psychotherapy can sort of help you kind of work with that. But I think there's ultimately some spots where someone wants to go to a more, religiously based or spiritually based thing, if that's their thing. Most psychiatrists in the here and now right now would basically consider most of the illnesses to be brain-based illnesses. That doesn't mean that the meanings or the suffering are purely based on molecular phenomena, and I think we have to be aware that we don't sort of sign off on that too soon. Absolutely. Yeah. Just in responding to your question, I can't help but reflect back to you that one of the conditions of psychiatry that has virtually the greatest evidence for genetic susceptibility is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. ADHD is more heritable than schizophrenia, and in many studies it is as heritable or more heritable than height.
Wow. Wow. Whoa. On that note.